Back in with another breakdown of Netflix's Ripley. In this installment, we are looking at wide shots. Now, I'm taking some liberties with this because the true wide shots that I want to talk about are much wider than some of the shots that I put in here. But I think there's enough there to chew the fat on with them, so I'm keeping them in there. Hope you don't mind. Going to dive right in with the wide shots and single point perspective shots within Netflix's Ripley. Jumping straight on this one, a couple of things to talk about lighting wise. We've got a big push of light coming from this direction, and you can see his shadow is kicked out in this direction, so we know that that is a light which is quite a long way back because it's casting all the way down the street, giving us a nice even level. We're not really getting anything in the way of fall off to speak of across that thing. And then it's had a wet down, so we get all of this cool sheen across, and that helps to define Ripley, and this is Ripley just standing here, in his silhouette against all of that. So by having that light effectively backlighting him and then catching across the whole street, wetting it all down, means that we can really see where he is and follow him through. It's rare in Ripley that we see a practical source in shot, and we have one just here, and that I guess is implied to be the light source that would be illuminating him. Now, we know that that probably isn't the case, because if that was the light source that was illuminating him at this distance, it would just be blaring into the lens and it would be so bright. So actually, if we look at what's going on, you can see another set of shadows, and they're kicking off down this way from that fire escape. So we know that street light isn't the actual light that's doing the push, because it would be kicking light in the opposite direction. And you can see all of these little shadows kicking down across here. So actually, in actual fact, it's probably something else, and maybe it's been painted out even, or is further back over this way. And that then pushes out across this scene, lights the whole area that we can see down here, and gives us that lovely sheen. Now, it's also catching on some of the other stuff over the side, you know, that angled surface just there, top of the bridge just here. Really helps to define what's going on, and it's also illuminating the frontage of this building as well. Now, in the foreground, we've got tons of stuff, but it's all going off to shadow and only catching minimal amounts of that light because it's a little bit more recessed. It's back this way, so it isn't going to catch the same quantity of light. Aside from this, if we get rid of all of that, we do have a few interesting things going on with framing for this wide shot. Ripley is traveling along down towards this vanishing point, but it's not quite in the center of frame. So if we followed these lines through, something you're going to learn is that I can't draw straight lines on an iPad because of the angle just here, or even normally, really. So that converging point just there of all of these lines, ooh, that was terrible. So the convergence of all of these lines is sort of down somewhere to this point. So we're kind of aiming, if we had a bullseye, for it to be right about there. And Ripley is traveling towards that. Now, it isn't in the dead center of the frame. So if you imagine a perfect vanishing point shot, then everything would be going in, converging right in the middle. We're going to see some of those, so let's skip ahead. If you wanted to do this, incidentally, it is obviously harder to achieve a wide night shot on a budget. Using the weather to do your wet down is probably the most effective way if it is a true wide shot, because wetting down a large area is incredibly challenging, and you really need to have the right permits and stuff to go out and do that if you're going to do that. So yeah, on a smaller scale, you could wet a small area, but to do this, if it's just been raining, that's the time to go out and do your shot like this. In terms of lighting for it, you could get away with a lot less these days. If there aren't other things in shot like car headlights or street lamps, windows that are really brightly illuminated, you can certainly, with a sensitive camera, crank your ISO up a little bit and then be able to use smaller lighting fixtures to achieve a somewhat similar effect. Now, at a certain point, you are always going to bump up against big budget things, have big budget night scenes, and the night scenes look a certain way because of the scale of kit they're using. I think the saving grace with this, if you're trying to replicate it, is that it's a relatively contrasty look. It is relying on reflections and silhouettes, so you could achieve something like it. Now, that tiny little Zhun X60 behind me is nowhere near enough to light all of this, not even slightly. But if you stepped up to some of the other bigger fixtures that they have, and I've just been testing the really newly launched one, which is the G300, that's got a boost mode which takes like 500 watts, and it's like this big, you know, and you can power it off one of those portable big battery banks that you can plug a wall socket into. Well, with something like that, yeah, you could flood a really big area with it. And if you had a sensitive camera, actually I think you could achieve this look in a really guerrilla, nimble way without having to bring in massive fixtures and cherry pickers and all the rest of it. Now you still have to find somewhere to put the light, and the light still does tend to need to be up quite high, but I think it's getting more achievable. The biggest challenges that you have are the other lights that you will come across being relatively powerful. So like car headlights, they start to kill your ratios, so you do have to watch out for that. Anyway, something that is vaguely achievable, I think. Really simple things. This type of shot you will come across loads if you do commercial work. You're in some kind of manufacturing environment and you need to capture a nice wide of the space and get a sense of what's going on. So what do we have here? Well, we've got obviously everything vanishing back to the door just here. That is very much our central point to look at. We have lines that kind of start to converge back to it, but we don't get things going off into infinity because we hit that wall. And then behind it, we have another building, and that just kind of caps us off. You know, it just immediately stops our vanishing point from ever vanishing. But within the shot just here, we do have loads of things just giving you the sense of what is going on here. Now it gets a little bit warped here because we've got this boat and it kind of curves like that. That's a cool kind of different take on these straight lines that we always see. Lines going down like this are pretty perpendicular, so we know that we're at a certain height and we're looking flat onto it, and we're with a certain length of lens which isn't like super wide, low down, looking up, tilting all the lines back. And then everything that we're seeing just here helps to draw our eye to the two characters in the middle. So we've got Ripley and the shipbuilder, I forget his name, and they are just meandering through. Ripley's having a good old look around at what he can see. They are silhouetted mostly against this hot building in the background. That building is super duper hot, really bright. Everything else outside the windows is also kind of white and blown out, but all of the other windows are a little bit down because they're not open. This one's open, and I think general level wise, we are kind of getting a bit of a push from this direction because we can see shadowing on the floor just there, and that tells us that there's a light coming from that direction. But in terms of what actually is going on, it feels like the light's coming from behind because we have that big white building behind them. There's some cool little things going on with sparks and things just to catch your eye on that side, welding going on, so that's all nice. But yeah, I think this is a messy scene. There's tons of stuff, there's distracting things, but you still have the structure of trying to draw the eye in, and that's effective by having the door partially open. You make sure that they are not lost, because for the sake of argument, if that door was closed, it's black and white, everyone goes into shades of grey. They start to feel a little bit more like this guy just here, and you really wouldn't make them out. You'd have to be doing all kinds of other things to try to make sure that they were clear in the shot. So by having that door open, it makes sense, it's where they walked through, and positioning them there means that we can instantly see the main characters that we're meant to be looking at, and then we can take our time and look around the shot, because they do linger on these shots. There's a lot going on, there's a lot of detail, it's meant to give us a feel of it, it's meant to let our eyes gradually soak it all up. But I'm telling you, if it was like this, then we just, it would be unpleasing, unsatisfying to not know where those main characters were who were talking. This is one of the purest single point perspective vanishing point shots. So let's take a look. We've got all kinds of fun stuff with the lighting, and obviously the window in the back just here becomes our light source, which is implied to be lighting everything that's going in there. In practice, there's definitely more light coming from somewhere up here, like above the center of the room, because you can see the shadowing on these arches. That isn't shadowing that's coming from there, that's either other windows that we can't see that are in the roof of the building, and in fact you get a little hint of that on either side just here. But it could totally be something they've added in as well, just to create a sense of fill in this. Now there's other things they could be doing, and I'm going to call out a couple of thoughts on this, because in these little alcovey bits, we actually fade off, the light level drops, it gets a little bit dark. It actually goes to quite a crunchy darkness in the shadows as well, which is kind of satisfying. Now, I'm looking at this building and I'm thinking that perhaps there would be windows in those sides. So perhaps they've gone in and they've just blocked them off with neg, or closed the shutters, or closed the curtains, or whatever. So if you were trying to do this, you might not get such a pure feel from it. Totally might walk into a space like this, a big church or something, and you got that window at the end and the light is beaming through it. Might just feel like this. But also, in order to get what they're after, they may be taking extra steps. I don't know one way or the other. I'm just speculating. Now, apart from that, we do have some cool little highlights just kicking along the wood just here of this doorway that we're looking through. And then everything, all the heavy lifting, is being done with the sheen across the floor. And it is absolutely focused on where Ripley is walking. So this huge area of highlight is what he's walking through. And immediately then, apart from the window, the other thing that we're getting is this reflection, this sheen of light, and that's where he is casting a shadow out. He, again, is played almost entirely in silhouette for this. And we've got all of the downsides to camera, so downsides of everything are to us, whether it's the pillars or little bits of desks or whatever they're on there, even the doorway that we got here, even though it's got the sheen on it to help us see roughly what's going on, it's darker, it's down. And then we're drawn into that middle point. Now, in terms of vanishing point with this, I'll just jump back over to yellow is what I use. For some reason, I've decided yellow is the color to draw structural elements and lines. We have this line going across here, got the lines of all of the tops of the pillars coming across here, and if we converged everything, we would get pretty much bang into the center of the frame. Thinking more about the framing with this, that single vanishing point going away, I've got my little straw hats patch to help me draw a straight line, because goodness knows you've seen I cannot do it. So yeah, that going across there. We've got all of the lines from the tops of the pillars coming in like this, and again, same thing we've got on this side as well. So it's all giving us this idea that we are heading towards something. And again, same as with previous shots, it actually ends prematurely. It doesn't carry on going in an infinite corridor till you get to nothing. But we do have something in the center just here, this sort of altar-y looking thing just here. So it gives us a small point in that central plane where we are definitely heading towards. And if we carried on the lines, we would find that more or less we are heading towards that. So that becomes our focal point. Above this, we have that window doing all of the heavy lifting. We've got all of the other architecture and structure going on. And then we've got Ripley. If we imagine that this means that the horizon is somewhere across here, we're sort of placing him below that horizon. And we're doing it on a number of levels just here. It's not just that is the imaginary cutoff point, but we've got other structure within the building which is kind of telling us that he's below all of this. This is all huge and vast. Now, film theory on all of this gets wild, and you can say all kinds of things, but when a character is being pressed upon by their environment, it gives a certain vibe. And here, this structure is definitely bigger than him and more impressive than him, and he hasn't got to the point yet where he's mastered what all of this is about. Spoilers, he's going here to see a Caravaggio, and then at the end he's going to use some of the knowledge, some of the ideas, maybe it's just the callback to the guy saying it's all about the light, to then make his bid for freedom and achieve it. So he will ultimately take all of this in and make it his own. But yeah, overanalyzing. It's a cool shot. I love it. I love the fact that we've got that practical bang in the center, and the fact that it's very symmetrical going all the way down the line just there. Next, we dive into something which has a bit of nature in it. So we've got the less formal paved road. It's more of a dirt track just here in the foreground, and that is giving us a little bit of an idea of vanishing point, which is sort of in the center of the frame. Foreground, all of the taxi and police car just there. But then we've got this avenue of trees really tall, really interesting, look like, I don't know, broccoli. Fascinating kind of structure that just keeps going back and back. And then way in the background, we actually get some light coming across them. So zooming in, you can see there's an edge on that tree. This tree is way brighter and it's catching loads down that side as well. And then the whole road is illuminated, and this guy obviously is backlit by whatever is illuminating the road in theory. It feels like there's something for him, which is pushing in sort of a little bit toppy and kind of this way. It's catching the top of his car, and indeed we can see a little bit of that just there and just there, just on all of the reflective edges. So there's something which is pushing in on top. And then I think there's something else in the background just here, because this all feels like it's a little bit more side lit, and that would make sense. You know, you would in this scenario be trying to light a deep background, flying another enormously high cherry picker up in order to replicate the same angle of light as the light that you've got in the foreground is, it just doesn't make sense. No one's going to notice unless they're some nerd on YouTube looking at how this is all lit. So yeah, everything in the foreground tree-wise is just lit on top. And then when we get to the background, the trees are more lit on the side as well, and we've got this kind of brighter area. The sky also has a little bit of a push to it, so if we take some of this away, you can see in the center there's a brighter area just blossoming out from this central point. It's not crazy bright, but it is bright enough that it helps to pick out silhouettes and what have you. I'm going to call out the wet down again. Everything here would not be nearly as clear if it wasn't slightly wet. Now this is interesting. It's interesting because I think in the series I didn't really see it rain all that much. So yeah, for all of the constant wet downs, very much an aesthetic choice. You don't have to necessarily justify it. It'll make everything look cool. Yeah, in terms of lighting from above though, this feels smaller. It doesn't feel like a massive source. You're going to get more punch out of a smaller light if you use it harder versus trying to diffuse it over a very, very large area. The practical in shot here, I suppose, would be his car headlights, and the tail lights just here are sitting pretty low in level, which does tell you, you know, I mean, it's a classic car. They wouldn't necessarily have been super powerful, but we see enough of the number plate and what have you to make out it's a police car. All of that good stuff is in there for us to be able to look at. And of course, his little catch on the top of his head. Very nice. Good to see a shot that has nature and just a road giving us this sense of vanishing point and architectural structures, you know, with those big trees and grand canopies. So yeah, a bit different, but kind of the same. For me, this one, it's a wide shot, it's a full shot, you know, you're seeing him head to toe and then some, but it's not in the same scope as the other ones we've seen. What it does remind me of, and it's maybe a play on other things, but for me, German expressionist cinema, it's sort of Nosferatu coming up the stairs, you know, with these dramatic shadows, and I think that plays with what's going on here. Spoilers, there's been a murder and we're taking away the body, so yeah, it's dark deeds that are happening. Now I think that reference to German expressionism with this also holds true in the lighting, because it's the shadow, it's the way it's playing on the wall. Normally the shadows are very carefully positioned and neatly defined and very human, like, you know, they're just going out from someone neatly. Here, with the way that he's lit, he's catching the light from this direction, and his shadow is just coming this monstrous form across the wall. You know, it's not human, it's not him, it's just this thing looming over the top of the body just here. So even in terms of what's going on, he's got the legs, but the body lying prone, being dragged down the stairs, and the dead body on the stairs is just in the thrall of this huge shadow which is just playing across the whole of the wall there. Now we are getting some shadowing of the staircase as well, and it's not super crisp, so it's not like it's a really tiny light far away making a point source and making crisp shadows. They're a little bit softer than that, and that push is brighter closer to this side than it is on this side. So that tells us that it's meant to be replicating a practical light source which is in the space and is closer to him on this side than it is on this side. Everything else about this is cool as well. So we've got lots of nice structures. Theme of staircases coming into play again. You know, you've got this lovely line of the staircase going up. We've got some pillars in the building and the cage of the elevator, which has put him into this position. And it just makes overall for a very satisfying shot, going from corner to corner, and then all of that callback with the shadow, with the way that it's positioned, with the way they're moving down the stairs, the sound design, the creaking, you know, the thumping down the stairs, the sickening splat of the blood as he's going down the stairs with his head. It's all... So yeah, I think that as a piece, this one made me think of more other things than most of the other shots in this did. Whereas most of the other shots, I'm just thinking, wow, that's cool framing. Wow, this is making me feel like there's a reference. There's that Nosferatu with the shadow and the monster and the way that it plays out here. I think in my head that fits, that works. Another night scene, we've got another wet down, and it's on a staircase as well. Obviously all the lines are just going up to this kind of central point just here where we are focused. It's brighter up there. We've got Ripley's silhouette, lots of foreground stuff which is way more down. So everything being lit by that that hotel sign that we can see just there, and the street light in theory. But you can see the shadow pushing down the staircase. Everything on top of the staircase is being caught by this light, so you get the sense of it, you get all those lovely neat lines, and then even in the foreground we're still getting that sheen across all of the paving there as well. They've gone to great lengths to make sure that the other buildings along the side are much more down. You know, there's still detail in there, but it generally feels like it's getting darker further towards us than the hotel just here, which suddenly feels bang like the place you want to be going because everything else is moody and ominous. So this illuminator sign and this little street light, totally not the lights that are actually doing that. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that that hotel sign is a very tall light source. And at a certain distance, that's going to roughly homogenize into one light source coming out that's got a lot of softness in that direction. Softness in different directions is maybe a weird concept. Maybe I shouldn't dwell on it too much, but suffice it to say, if you've got a big source like a 12 by 12, that's soft horizontally and it's soft vertically because it's a big source, assuming that it's relatively close to your subject. Here we've got something that might be 20 feet tall, and okay, it's not a 20-foot tall strip box, but it kind of is. So I would think that actually it would make the shadows a little bit softer than they are in that aspect, but that totally isn't what is actually lighting him. So we will have another light source doing the heavy lifting here. They will have their studio lights, and in fact, if you look at the top, you can kind of see a little bit of sort of blooming out of the lens just here, which implies there's something out of frame, just giving a push, doing the heavy lifting of the light. The practicals are still going to work, they're still going to do things, but yeah, definitely using that film light to give you a bigger push. If you were going out and doing this, you can achieve this with relatively small lights. I've already alluded to that. These days, LEDs have a good amount of level they can put out. They don't use a ton of power, so they can be run on batteries. You could achieve things like this. The biggest stumbling point, again, is what is happening in the general vicinity and controlling the other things and how your ratios sit with them. Satisfying in terms of framing, satisfying in terms of lighting, and again, the idea that we can see very, very clearly where we're meant to be looking and have his silhouette positioned and his shadow positioned moving up that staircase. Even the tops of the stairs are allowing us to clearly see his silhouette, because if that light was too low and we weren't actually casting it across the tops of the stairs, then he would just be black on black. You know, if he was down here, it would be harder to make out his silhouette. So there's a lot of really conscious choices to make this work, even though it's a relatively simple idea. You've got to make sure all of those things come together. I love this one because it's just so stark. It's unashamedly hard light. We are not midday because there's direction to it, and the direction is coming from this direction, but it feels like hard light on people, then being edged on this side, down on the backs of their heads and all of that. We're getting contrast on the seawall just here. All of that is just falling off to shadow, but we still have detail on the top of that as well. Similar story. We can still see the detail, but we have this little strip that they're walking along, which is brighter. So it is all about the framing, and then the sky starts off very bright on this side and then gradually gets a little bit darker on this side, but not much at all. And I think that when you're looking at this, it's just the camera height, the position of it, how much of that walkway do you want to see? It can be hard to get up above people enough to see down onto something like that, perhaps, depending on what your geography in the location you're shooting is going to give you, unless you have jibs and all kinds of crazy things. So here, making that decision to be able to see their feet, to be able to see that strip of light, and then have the lens far enough away that we're able to get a very flat look across the whole thing, squaring up to it so that we're not looking down one way or the other way, and then making sure that we're not tilting back or tilting forwards if we're up too high. So all the lines stay nice and straight, and then we just get this lovely, crisp, simple scene where they're just walking along the seawall. Ever so simple. It isn't rocket science. Anyone could do it. Final one we're going to look at is an interior where we can see stuff going on outside, and I just love how we're looking into the room here, and it very much, I'm going to use my little straw hat again, is just sitting everything on this line, boom, into this central point going down, and that really intersects with where Ripley is sitting. So all of these little things going across, I mean, there isn't a line at the same level, but if it was, it'd be like that. And that just takes us to the point where we can see Ripley in the middle. We've got lovely scenery outside, so the windows and the structure that they give us distract us from him. So he's not immediately necessarily the only thing that we can focus on, because there's all of this going on outside. But that's part of the scene, that's part of the grandeur of it. We are there to soak up the amazing old school charm of everything that he's seeing. Light coming in, obviously it's from the window just here, and it's hard light, so we've got these lovely shadows, lovely shafts of light cast across the wall, and then not much of it is really playing on Ripley, so he's just sort of in the foreground there. We've got another little shaft off this side, and then a little bit on this window, but very much we're seeing, because of all the lines, we're just pulled in to Ripley in the center just here, and he's sitting at the typewriter, and typewriters come into play a little bit in this. We won't go into any spoilers. Got light casting across the desk as well. He's relatively down. His skin's, not a million miles off what is happening on the wall. So it's not like he is defined with a really crisp downside. He's definitely down to camera, but it isn't like it's crazy. And certainly we've seen far more silhouette shots and far darker downsides within the show. But he still is down to camera. But I think that within the whole shot, it, again, allows us to focus in on him because of how it's framed. Very neat. All the lines are very straight, so verticals are vertical, which tells us the camera's positioned in a certain point in the room, not tilting too far back, not tilting too far forwards, looking at him. If you want to see the floor and do that, you've got to make sure that you are at a certain height. If you go too high, you're going to start to lose the floor, so you've got to kind of slide up and down to get to this point. And that all just leads us to look at Ripley, of course, after we've had a little bit of a luxuriate in the scenery. And that, I think, is part of what they are trying to achieve with this. They're not playing everything purely in close-ups. They're not shying away from having very long shots that don't move, that don't zoom or anything like that. Is just sitting on the character and letting you see what they're doing, getting a feel for what's going on. And then as that all happens, your eye just, what's over there? What's over there? It's to help you soak up what the characters are experiencing. Now, whether or not they do that at a pace which is satisfying for you is another question. Whether or not you liked the constant use of black and white, it is an entirely black and white series. Some people have found that strenuous. Some people really don't like the fact that they have made this all in black and white. I think that it is a bold choice. It certainly makes it more memorable. I think it would have been very easy to do this series and not focus on making the cinematography as much of a feature, and then you would have just had another telling of the same story. So maybe having the bold black and white cinematography with all of these different stylistic choices that they've made helps to make this more of a standout series. Should the cinematography be the standout thing? Does that distract from the series? Does the lingering shots that you need in order to justify the way that you framed this to make sense of the story, does that length of time actually start to become a millstone? Is it something that's to the detriment of the storytelling? Could you tell the story in a more satisfying way by making it shorter and using some more efficient shots to tell the audience what they need to be paying attention to, what they need to be thinking about? Maybe. But would people have spoken about it so much? I don't know. It's hard to say. People like series for the reasons they like them. Sometimes something will become like a sleeper hit. Sometimes, it goes on to become a cult classic. And I can definitely say, looking at all of these shots, it feels like the cinematographer and the director, for sure, and I imagine most of the crew, had a lot of fun composing them. And I imagine that the actors also had fun just being able to play and move and exist in a space without having to do constant coverage. So yeah, drop a comment below, tell me what you think, and I'll see you next time.